We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's educational webinar entitled Military Brain Health Research Partnerships, the What and the How. I'm Dr. Chantel Ferlin-Beckham. I am the chair of the Programming, Engagement, and Outreach Committee for the American Brain Coalition and also a member of the ABC board. Today, the ABC, along with ABC member Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, or Mtech for short, are proud to host this webinar to educate the brain community on the importance of military relationships within the brain space. Today, we will hear from 3 expert speakers, and we will allow the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation for a Q&A with the panel of speakers. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A box, but for now, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's programming. I'm going to start by turning over the webinar to Dr. Lauren Palestrini, Chief Science Officer for Mtech, who will introduce the panelists and get us started.
Great, thank you, Chantel. So first, I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting us to speak today. As Chantel said, I am Lauren Palestrini, the Chief Science Officer of Mtech, which is a nonprofit organization that works with the Department of Defense to fund the advancement of medical technologies that benefit the warfighter. And we fund technologies that meet all the medical needs of the warfighter, of which mental health and brain health are very high priority areas. I'm a chemical engineer by training and worked at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals in the process development group, then went back to grad school for a PhD in biomedical engineering and started my career in military medicine. I had become an associate director at the New Jersey Center for Biomaterials, and then the chief operating officer of the Armed Forces Institute of Regenerative Medicine, and then was brought on to help build and establish Mtech as a nonprofit back in 2015, 2016. I would also now like to take the opportunity to introduce my colleagues from the Department of Defense. First, I have Ms. Sarah Langdon here, the program manager at the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. Sarah, can you just add a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've been with USA MRDC, which is our acronym, for over 20 years. I started in tech transfer as a licensing associate. So I've always kind of worked outside of the federal acquisition regulation space, which was a nice fit for working with OTAs and Mtech. I do not have a science background. I have a business background. So I always enjoy these webinars. They're so great to be a part of, and I just thank you for having me.
Great. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. J.B. Phillips, the portfolio manager of Neurotrauma at Combat Casualty Care at the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. J.B., can you please add a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a neuropharmacologist. I manage the neurotrauma portfolio for the Department of Defense at Fort Detrick. I've been at MRDC also for over 20 years and served with the Army and overseas in East Africa prior to this. But I look forward to a great talk today. Thank you.
Great. All right, now to kick us off with our webinar, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to get us started.
Thanks for working the slides, Lauren. No, wait, there might be a little bit of a delay. There we go. Okay, so I'm really excited to dive into the topic of brain health research today. As the resident business person, I am going to actually start off by setting the stage a little bit. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, if you don't already know, brain health is a top priority for the military. The fiscal year 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, requires the Secretary of Defense to establish a comprehensive initiative for brain health. Next slide. So if you've ever looked at a government org chart, they can be quite involved. I know we have some prior military on the line. Today, I attempted to simplify some of those org charts by breaking them down into sections to show where at the Defense Health Agency and the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command, where we fall within the big picture and the chain of command. The Department of Defense, I'll say DoD, is America's largest government agency with the mission of providing the military forces needed to deter war and ensure the nation's security. So the DoD is focused on 3 key issues: defend the nation, take care of our people, which the Warfighter Brain Health Initiative falls under, and succeeding through teamwork, which innovation and partnerships such as our partnership with Mtech falls under. So as you can see on the chart under the Office of the Inspector General, the services fall under DoD, as well as the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And so OSD, and they are responsible for policy development, planning, resource management, and program evaluation. OSD, that is the maroon box on the screen, includes the offices of top civilian defense decision makers with regards to personnel, weapons, acquisition, research, intelligence, and fiscal policy, as well as the offices of the secretary, and they are established to assist in carrying out those assigned responsibilities. So if you follow down the screen, you'll see there's also a highlighted maroon box, and that's where you'll see Defense Health Agency. But because no DoD org chart is simple, there's actually a few more layers in between OSD and Defense Health Agency. So I'll quickly drill down in the next slide. Okay. All right. So the blue highlighted box that you see refers to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. And this office is responsible for, among many other things, oversight of the state of military readiness. So you can kind of see how eventually we're going to fall under the personnel readiness. So this office is responsible for many other things, oversight of the state of military readiness. I said that. You'll note there's a box highlighted to the left. That maroon box is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. The Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs is the principal staff element for all DoD health and force protection policies, programs, and activities. This office is responsible for the effective execution of the DoD medical mission, providing and maintaining readiness for medical services and support to members of the military services, including during military operations. This also includes their families and those held in control of the military services and others entitled to or eligible to DoD medical care and benefits, including those under TRICARE. So we at the DHA and the U.S. Army Medical Research Command fall under the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, that maroon box. So if we can go to the next slide. And okay, so this slide kind of allows us to drill down under health affairs to see several staff elements that fall under health affairs, as well as the Defense Health Agency. So if you see all the way to the left, there's a health affairs box under the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. And then 3 boxes down, the dark blue box is the Defense Health Agency. And then underneath of that is the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. Next slide. Okay, our Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, all the way to the left, is Dr. Lester Martinez-Lopez, who also many years ago served as our Commanding General at the USAMRDC. So he is very familiar with our organization. Next slide. Dr. Martinez-Lopez in his capacity is vocal, as are the leaders above him, in reiterating that promoting brain health and countering TBI is a top priority. So we get a lot of questions about Defense Health Agency, and at MRDC, we just transitioned under Defense Health Agency a few weeks ago, actually 10 days ago or so. So it's all fairly new for us, but for DHA, they were created from the recommendations of a task force formed in 2011, and that task force was tasked to study options for defense health operations and also to trim the DoD's growing health budget. So years later, Congress enacted this change to create one single agency focused on enhancing the patient access to care and overall healthcare benefit. So ideally, this is our point where Army, Navy, Air Force, we all work together on our R&D solutions for the warfighter. DHA manages authority, direction, and control of military hospitals and clinics worldwide. They deliver agile and scalable combat support capabilities to the combatant commanders and the Joint Force, while providing comprehensive care and military health benefit entitlements to beneficiaries. So a few other things that DHA manages are execution of the Unified Medical Budget. They manage the DoD healthcare plan TRICARE, which is a big priority, and they manage the medical supply chain that supplies close to 560,000 medical devices to the Joint Force. Next slide. The director of DHA is Lieutenant General Crossland, and the other leader on this slide I'm going to point out for the purposes of today's presentation is Ms. Kathy Burst. She is serving as the Acting Assistant Director Support Component Acquisition Executive for the Defense Health Agency. And in this role, she is responsible for all acquisition matters of the agency with an annual acquisition and procurement spend of $2.3 billion. So responsibilities include support to the military health system in the areas of research and development, acquisition, medical logistics, and contracting. Next slide. And under the leadership of Ms. Burst, you will see on the bottom right is Brigadier General Bailey, who is dual-hatted right now in his role. He's our current commanding general at USA MRDC until about July. And then he's also the lead for research and engineering on the DHA side. So as mentioned less than 2 weeks ago, we officially transitioned under DHA, and we fall directly under Brigadier General Bailey. So in this time of transition, the DHA is still building the path and integrating our command. And so I will briefly go over how MRDC is organized. That may change in the future, but it's important because Dr. Phillips falls under a portfolio area directorate within the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command. And so when he speaks about his neurotrauma portfolio, you can see how all of the various agencies work together and what the goal is through DHA to, work with our industry partners and our other government agencies, as well as other military. Okay, next slide. All right, this is a very busy slide. So just know that the MRDC is a medical material developer. We have responsibility for the medical research, development, and acquisition. Essentially, if a warfighter is impacted in an area, it is likely that we are doing research in that area. We have laboratories all over the US, but also globally. And also within MRDC, we have a contracting command, USAMRA, and the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, CDMRP. And they manage our congressional special interest medical research programs such as breast, prostate, ovarian cancer, and many others. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, and then focusing on the right-hand side of this slide are our 5 areas of research, our S&T program area directorates. So they're listed. They include the Military Infectious Disease Research Program, Combat Casualty Care Research Program, which Dr. Phillips will speak to, our Military Operational Medicine Research Program. We also have Medical Chemical Biological Defense and Blast Injury. And then below that are our program management organizations. So that's on our advanced development, product development side. And you'll see we have an office dedicated to warfighter readiness and brain health. Next slide. Okay, so this is where I really just want to foot stomp that we need partners to fill our medical capability gaps. We cannot do this alone, and we absolutely need to partner. Next slide. And this again is a slide about partnerships, how important they are, who we partner with, industry, academic centers, nonprofit organizations. Mtech is great because they have all of those partners within their organization, and we're able to utilize OTAs. Next slide. And this is my last slide, and it's really just talking about when we take the lead in research, development, and acquisition. And, sometimes there are issues that are unique to the military, and it's just not of interest to the commercial sector. Other times we need a solution really quickly. And then other times we're directed by Congress, which kind of fits with the topic that we're discussing today. So with that, I will hand it over. Thank you.
There we go. Good afternoon and good morning, wherever you may be. I'm JB Phillips, and I want to go over this portfolio and how we do things and why we do things, and how the military is different than what we see earlier. In that title slide, if you can go back for a second, if it's possible, there's an error there, a couple, I wouldn't say error, but something's different. One, that helicopter. In future battle, we're not going to have a helicopter out there by itself, hanging out in the wide open. If you can see what's going on in Ukraine, they don't have helicopters just hanging around out there. Also, we have 4 people around 1 patient. That's not happening in future battlefields. We're fortunate to get 1 person to each patient, and that's a challenge. So through this, you'll see some of the challenges we have in addressing the future of war as we expect to see it. Next slide. Thank you. I have no conflict of interest. Just note that anything said outside of these slides that are printed are my opinion, not representing the Department of Defense or the Army. Next slide. I want to just cover maybe 2 things here. I want to reiterate what Ms. Langdon said about requirements. We are requirement driven. So in other words, I don't decide this is our need. My deputy, my assistant doesn't decide this is what we need. Our director doesn't necessarily do that. It's by a body of individuals with experience that decide what are the gaps and the needs of the military or medical needs. And some of that you could see was from the Honorable Martinez Lopez, who drives down some requirements, same as Congress, about what we need to do to fill these gaps in brain injury. Also within the neurotrauma scope, within my program, we're closing these military relevant gaps for brain injury in the battlefield at that initial injury point through the acute hospitalization. That's our space where we operate and we try to solve problems earlier for brain injury. Next slide, please. I want to go over a few things regarding our needs in managing TBI in combat. On the left, you'll see our overarching needs. These are large needs that kind of drive a lot of combat casualty care. We need to triage these patients and diagnose them early and fast. In past wars, we've been fortunate to been able to evacuate patients where a diagnosis isn't necessarily needed. If you banged your head, we're going to get you out of there. Future battlefield, we do not have that opportunity. If you read and see what's going on in Ukraine, you can see what future battlefield could look like, where you just can't evacuate anybody when you want to. We need to initiate treatment earlier at point of injury. And you know, in any disease, especially trauma, the earlier you can get to intervening in that trauma, the better off they'll be. We need treatments with extended storage life, because when we field something, it can sit around for a while and be transported through various environments, which I'll show in a little bit. We have quite a diverse environments which we plan to operate in, and that can make it complicated for treatments. We want to be able to handle prolonged care. When we can't have evacuation for several days, we need to handle this patient or range of patients to be able to monitor them and treat them if possible, so we can, I guess, save that further damage by sitting and waiting around for more definitive care. We need to, with more confidence, give commanders the ability to determine if somebody can return to duty, especially after a closed head injury. When you don't know what's going on in there, but they're a little dizzy, what does that mean? Can they operate their weapon again? We don't know that yet. That's a gap that still needs fulfilling. Some detailed needs, as you'll see, are less invasive treatments for moderate and severe TBI. There's a massive drive toward infection in combat. So the less invasive you are, the better off that patient could be. We need things that are technologies that have multiple purposes on one platform, and for vendors and researchers to understand size, weight, and power. That's what SWAP is. We need low footprint, small items. We can't carry around large things. Also, a low to no cold chain. For instance, we don't have a lot of capability to store things in freezers and refrigerators like you can in the standard US healthcare system. Detecting cerebral hemorrhage in theater of operations closer to the point of injury is a need that we don't have. We can't field a head CT where we need it. So we need more handheld items, technologies that can tell us how large a cerebral hemorrhage is, where it is, and if it's decreasing or increasing in size. We're looking at other objective markers, such as intracranial pressure, some blood flow, blood markers, glucose, for instance, blood oxygen, and things of that nature. And again, we need to objectively assess individuals' cognitive ability. Can they return to the battle? And right now, that's a gap that we just cannot fill. Next slide, please. In order to get to these gaps that I just talked about, we're really faced with a number of constraints that I hope you can understand and appreciate. We operate in very austere clinics. We have very limited resources that we're privileged to have in this developed world where we are in the US. When we're deployed, we don't have a lot of these resources because of the weight they are and the fact that we need to be mobile. You can see we operate in cramped spaces where there's low lighting and extreme environments, from very cold weather to very hot, wet weather, for instance. Mass casualty and polytrauma is a need that we need to address. That's because a lot of head injuries are not isolated. They have other trauma going on. As I mentioned earlier, there's an increased opportunity for infection in combat, so we need to address that. And often the way we assess TBIs now in theater are more subjective, and they can lead to malingering. We need more objective assessments of concussion and concussion progress in theater of operations. And to get to specialist care, that requires evacuation, and we're not really privileged to evacuate people as often as we have been in past wars. Next slide, please. In this slide, I just want to do a quick comparison of civilian and military management of TBI. At the top, you can see civilian management, where the immediate care is addressed by EMS, the first responder, usually in an ambulance, within an hour. They're transported to emergency medicine. Depends on what level of trauma you need. And in the US, that can be tough. It's a long way to get to a level 1 trauma center from some places. So there's challenges here in the US system too. From that, they get to more definitive care and rehab. Now in the military below that, we have medics that are mostly at the immediate care. They're minimally trained. And if we're fortunate, the patient can be transferred to Role 1, which is a battalion aid station, which may have an MD, a physician assistant, or an RN. And limited capabilities, they operate out of like a mobile tent you can see there. I question mark all of these transfer items to keep them in the line of continuum of care, because that's not necessarily possible. Then we go to a Role 2. That's where a patient can first see a trauma surgeon. Now, at this, they operate in large tents. They have very limited patient holding capabilities, and there's no neurosurgery capability at Role 2. Role 3 is a field hospital, further away from the fight. That's a longer transport, and they do have ICU and beds and neurosurgery capabilities. And finally, to Role 4, that's more of your typical large hospitals. Now, below in blue, you can see civilian medicine moves patients along this continuum of care. The idea in some cases for military, is to move the other way, to bring capabilities from the right to the left, to bring capabilities that we have at a role or a level 1 trauma center. Can we bring those further toward the fight? Those type of capabilities so we can address the need sooner without needing to evacuate that patient. And this follows with the next slide, please. Push the button. This follows the need to detect, triage, and treat earlier, and to further monitor and treat these people as they stay in theater of operations, and finally escalate their care for rehab and management outside of the theater of operations. Next slide, please. Now, we don't do this in isolation. As Ms. Langdon said, we work with our partners, and these are some key partners that I want to discuss, just mention with you. The first is the TrackNet or Track TBI. And this actually, the current Track TBI work is funded by the DoD and managed through Mtech, which you'll hear about after me. This started with NIH back in 2012 as a prototype to start building out a consortium. And the DoD overtook it to start looking in precision medicine for TBI and early level 1 trauma centers. Now this network, which is centered at University of California, San Francisco, has transitioned to more advanced development to where they run phase 2 clinical trials, drug trials for TBI using that established consortium. To the lower left there, the NCAA DoD Grand Alliance or CARE Consortium. This is also funded by the DoD in partnership with the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA, through the Mtech. The CARE Consortium is the Concussion Assessment Research and Education Group. They work along with the military called the SALTOS. SALTOS is the Service Academy Longitudinal TBI Observation Study. This group has over 26 universities, 58,000 subjects to look at concussion. And a lot of data, tremendous amount of data has come out of this collaboration we have with the NCAA. NCAA has changed policies already because of this study. In 2018, they've changed NCAA football rules because of data coming out of this. And more data is coming out looking at gender or sex differences in this population, and it has a robust data on the diversity of subjects within this population. To the right is the Limbic Consortium. That's a DoD Veterans Affairs collaboration. This is where we can finally get to some blast injuries. Most TBIs that we have studied come from a blunt trauma. Blast injury is different, and we're learning that now. This study is in its second round, and it is growing. They're also looking at biomarkers and long-term care of military and veterans suffering from TBI. The lower left is the VA's preclinical work in partnership with NIH and the DoD. This is funded by the DoD, but they're looking to better get preclinical comma data elements for TBI so that we can get more standardized animal work that can better translate to humans. And finally, the FIPR, the Federal Interagency TBI Research Data Repository, is in partnership with NIH. The DoD is currently funding the operations of FIPR. FIPR is a large study, and you can see that where we get data, clinical data. It's not research, it's not preclinical, it's clinical data. You can see we have 136 subjects and over 100,000 studies, over 100,000 subjects of data in here. And we're in the process of integrating the National Trauma Research Repository, which is a trauma database, into the backbone of FIPR. So eventually, within a year, we'll be able to get both TBI trauma data and both combined data. If they have a TBI and trauma, we can get that data. Next slide, please. I want to spend a minute talking about the National Academy's report many of you are probably aware of the TBI roadmap for accelerating progress. My portfolio funded this in 2021 to deliver for National Academies of Science to deliver a consensus study report on TBI. And you can see, you can pull the study report at that link down there in the slide. You can see that there are 8 recommendations that were made by the study report. The first recommendation I'm highlighting here, which has already started. This is a TBI classification working group, which was directed in the report for NIH to oversee. This is a large body of people, government and civilians, universities, and industry involved in this to change the classification of TBI, which is currently mild, moderate, and severe. That doesn't work at all. So this study is getting after the classification system to better it so we can get patient better care. And this will also help clinical trials. And you can see the 7 areas of the classification working group here. And the CBIM is currently what's going on for the ideal, which is the ideal way of renaming this. It's not the endpoint, but it's what's currently out there is C being clinical and biomarkers, imaging, and modalities. So we're getting a better way of really identifying people's severity of TBI. Next slide, please. Just a couple of points on translating research into action. It'd be great for investigators, researchers to think about the end result early and often. So I know publications are important and they've been very important, but it's also important to think about where your research needs to go for clinical impact. So think about that early when writing the proposal and think about it as the project's going on. You need that outcome to be transitioned to its next level, ultimately to get to that patient. And we're finding, especially in brain injury, the 100 solution may not be possible because our brains are so diverse. Trauma is so diverse. It's going to be hard to get to 100% of that population with one drug, for instance. We may get 60% of the population because each trauma is diverse. The injury and how people respond to it is diverse. So it may not be possible to get to 100%, but 80, 90% is an optimal goal. And I mentioned this earlier, we have consortium. And so consider existing consortium if a consortium is needed. DoD funds them, other government agency funds consortiums, and these have helped extremely well for many diseases from cancer, Alzheimer's to TBI. Don't invent a new consortium unless you can really see one's needed, because that takes money and additional time. So we suggest leveraging these. And often implementation science is overlooked, but it's very essential. And experts in this field can help improve the likelihood, we feel, of implementing science. Thank you. And let's go to my last slide, please. While she's getting it up, the slide addresses what we consider a hidden gap that we're just now seeing. As I mentioned earlier, most TBI has been researched at blunt trauma, contact trauma. We're seeing that blast injury, not from blunt injury, but blast wave injury is causing brain trauma. And if you read some recent New York Times articles, one came out in November 2023 called Secret War: Strange New Wounds and Silence from the Pentagon. And that publication really was after individuals that were deployed overseas, fighting adversaries and shooting weapons over and over and over with little relief. And they come back with strange problems to their head. Several of them committed suicide. They've been told they have strange cardiac issues that the physicians can't figure out. Some have anxiety and depression, but nothing they can find is wrong with their brain. They've died of suicide. Some have fortunately not died of suicide, but continue to have problems with help. So that's a gap we need to find. We don't know what's going on in the brain after you've been blasted over and over with blast waves. And the military is starting to see that more and more. And we want to get to that sooner, and we are. We're working with other DoD agencies to figure out ways to monitor this better and get to it sooner before it happens and people come home with these injuries that we cannot address. But we're getting there. Thank you very much. And I could transition to Dr. Palestrini, who can go over some of these partnership mechanisms, and Mtech is a key partner with us that I had highlighted earlier. Thank you, Dr. Palestrini.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Phillips, for transitioning over. All right, hopefully my slide deck sticks with us for the rest of this. All right, so JB gave a great overview of the military's traumatic brain injury focus. I just wanted to kind of level set or take a step back on some of the rates or some statistics that might be relevant to this audience. So, and related both to mental health and military health. So we know that the rates of incident mental health disorders in the military are generally higher in females. Those rates do decline with as those folks age. Adjustment disorders are most commonly diagnosed, and there are several others that are also relatively common, like anxiety, depression, alcohol-related disorders. And then we know that military personnel, as Dr. Phillips just pointed out, and veterans are at increased risk for suicide compared to their civilian counterparts. In addition, over the last 2 decades, there have been approximately over 400,000 documented incidents of service members sustaining at least one traumatic brain injury. And the number of veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder varies by service area, but is higher in the military sector versus civilian. So it's about 7% for veterans and compared to 6% for civilians. And we also know that military populations have some unique needs when thinking about therapeutic interventions to some of these issues. So for example, military populations have been shown to experience less benefit from first-line psychotherapies for post-traumatic stress disorder relative to their civilian counterparts. So this brings me to Mtech, the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium. So who are we and what do we do? I think Mtech's major strength is that it is an ecosystem that brings together military funding sponsors with technology providers. Those technology providers come from academia, small and large businesses, and other nonprofits. And with a network of wraparound support services and private funders, all working together to advance development to both the commercial marketplace and to transition into use by the military. The consortium model of Mtech offers a variety of benefits to both the government and to innovators. As Ms. Langdon suggested several times, she referenced an OTA. So first, we operate under a contractual vehicle called the OTA, the Other Transaction Agreement. And that helps the government develop solutions faster that more closely align to the government need that Dr. Phillips just described. In addition, through this model, we open the aperture of innovation, allowing access to innovative solutions offered by both traditional and non-traditional defense contractors. So essentially, through the Mtech Other Transaction Agreement, essentially anyone can now do business and offer innovation to the government. The consortium-style ecosystem does foster collaboration between the government and the consortium members and allows for more open communication and partnerships that advance prototype development toward military needs. For innovators, the Other Transaction Agreement provides a means to faster contracting. So for example, from the time that you submit a proposal, you can actually receive your money, your funding in as short as several months to, on average, 6 months, which is significantly faster than more standard ways of doing contracting. In addition, there's the potential for non-competitive follow-on funding to continue the momentum of prototype advancement. So maybe you start with an award for $2 million for 2 years of a period of performance, you're doing great work, and we can kind of just add on funding and continue that momentum rather than having you stop, recompete, and then take another year or two to get back on award. So it really streamlines and continues that momentum of prototype advancement. And in addition, I think this overall consortium model does allow access to a dual use market, both military and civilian. So it really is great when some of these things can have a civilian use case so that the government, as sometimes is a cyclical buyer, can kind of come back and buy your technology when they need it and not necessarily have you rely on the government for sustainability. So I did mention we are a members-based consortium. We're comprised of over 600 member organizations, including over 400 small businesses, which really is a testament to the other transaction agreement. It really does provide that access to emerging innovation, could be even a two-man shop out of a garage or academic spin-offs or other small businesses that are out there. In addition, we have over 100 academic institutions providing access to novel technology, preclinical models, clinical research infrastructure, and other assets like even GMP manufacturing. And then nearly 40 industry members who bid on work or collaborate with other members as strategic partners. So Mtech really serves as a conduit for anyone to do business with the government, and including some of the examples that I already identified. Mtech has deployed over $1 billion of federal funding over the past 8 years, resulting in over 300 projects awards to date. So if you are looking for non-dilutive funding, Mtech should be a mechanism that you track because you may be missing out on a slice of the pie. And in our case, it's about now at 250 to 290 million per year. So if you're not really monitoring those requests for proposals or those funding opportunities, you're essentially missing out on nearly $300 million of available funding per year. So as the previous two speakers alluded to, mental health is a really major focus of the Mtech. It remains a top priority of the Department of Defense, overall brain health. Through the Mtech mechanism, we have over $170 million on Mtech award. And here's just a breakdown of some areas that I kind of pulled. So we have 42 million in traumatic brain injury detection, another 42 million in brain injury treatment, post-traumatic stress disorder management, 32 million, and in just behavioral health, wellness, and resilience, 55 million. And in many of those programs combined, we've enrolled over 11,000 patients in studies related to these brain health Mtech awards. So I wanted to just kind of give you 3 examples of projects that have been funded through Mtech that kind of focus on the mental health or traumatic brain injury areas that are relevant to this webinar. So the first one is a program related to suicide reduction. So although military service members typically have lower rates of psychiatric diagnoses than civilians, service members have consistently shown elevated rates of suicidal thoughts and behaviors, alcohol abuse, and aggression tied to intimate partner violence. A core driver of all of these adverse events is emotion dysregulation, which is characterized by difficulties in understanding, accepting, and adaptively coping with experienced emotions. The broad objective of this project is to develop and preliminarily evaluate something called Get Better Together, which is a relationship enrichment program designed to equip service members and their romantic partners with evidence-informed strategies to adaptively cope with stressors as a unified team, serving really as a primary prevention intervention for psychological distress related to suicide risk, alcohol and substance abuse, and intimate partner violence. So during phase 1 of the program, Get Better Together developed a curriculum and materials. Those were developed in collaboration with military stakeholders and content experts. Phase 2 was comprised of a single-arm open trial with Navy couples to demonstrate the feasibility, acceptability, and preliminary effects of the program. And just a report out on that is that 44 military couples found it highly acceptable, with 99% planning to use the strategies taught. And now we're finally in phase 3 of the program, which will consist of revising the Get Better Together based upon facilitator and participant feedback, disseminating information and materials and training to facilitate rapid implementation of Get Better Together. And I'm happy to report that in this light, a company called Prep Incorporated has recently licensed this program for commercialization for broader use. The next example I have is a traumatic brain injury diagnostic, which is applicable to the austere environment that Dr. Phillips kind of described. So as he indicated, traumatic brain injury is a major cause of injury and death among U.S. warfighters. And traumatic brain injuries may worsen in days following the injury as intracranial hemorrhage and edema expand, further injuring the brain and increasing intracranial pressure. So in a Role 1 environment, which again is kind of getting you back closer to that point of injury, rapid evaluation of the type and severity of traumatic brain injury is critical. So here we have a company on award called Sense Diagnostics. The Sense device uses radio frequency to non-invasively monitor the brain and has shown positive results for detecting and monitoring hemorrhage in patients suffering from a traumatic brain injury in the military sector or even civilians, and comparable to stroke in a civilian population. So the goals of this award are really to test the Sense device on a civilian patient in a population that mimics the military age range, develop an algorithm for detecting and monitoring hemorrhage, and modifying existing technology to meet the needs of the operational Role 1 environment, that austere environment closer to point of injury. And right now they are in a pivotal clinical trial, which is to be completed this year. And the last example was managing sleep disorders. So insomnia is the most prevalent sleep disorder among service members, which compromises readiness, health, productivity, and performance. Here we brought on a company called Noctum Health, which is a spin out of University of Pittsburgh. Noctum developed Coast as a clinical decision support software platform that guides any healthcare provider through CBTI and scales their capacity to manage patients by more than tenfold. So a Coast clinician in the loop and patient-centered solutions maximize patient engagement and treatment adherence to deliver optimal clinical outcomes. So here Coast has developed a more streamlined clinician-patient interaction via a cloud-based interface system, enabling clinicians to essentially or efficiently manage a higher patient load. And the app has been tested with partners, providers, and patients at military facilities. Coast is clinically validated for effectiveness with military personnel, veterans, and civilians who suffer from severe insomnia with stress-related comorbidities. And Coast is now commercially available for license. So I just leave on my last slide here that Mtech does have an annual membership meeting. And although it's short notice, our annual membership meeting is next week in Baltimore at the Baltimore Convention Center. And if anyone's interested in that, please feel free to follow up with me. I'd be happy to give you more details, or you could go to the Mtech website and kind of take a look at the agenda. The meeting really offers an opportunity for you to learn more about military medical needs from folks like Dr. Phillips and his colleagues, from within the Army, the Navy, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, BARDA, and the Air Force and other groups. It also allows you to network with the Mtech community, ask questions, and even present posters on your technology that are related to the military and Mtech mission. So here's my contact info. We did just release our 2023 annual report, so I encourage you to kind of take a look at that if you're interested in what are the areas that tend to be higher priority that are funded through Mtech. I think the annual report kind of gives you a good glimpse of that. And I will end here and turn it over to Chantel.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists for all of your insights. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. We don't have as much time, but we do have a few questions. Do you need to be a member to review opportunities or to respond to opportunities? And do you need to be able to sign up before the contract is awarded?
So for Mtech opportunities, to view them, they are publicly available. So they're posted to Mtech and to sam.gov. So everything's publicly available for viewing. If you are going to bid or submit a proposal, the prime contractor, so the organization that's submitting the proposal, has to be an Mtech member, but all of your subcontractors do not. And I can share more information about membership if anyone's interested in that. And there are other benefits as well of membership that I didn't get into today.
I just have another question. You mentioned that there are meetings and programs with outside organizations. Are they free for nonprofits to participate, and how can you get more information about those?
So through Mtech, any partnership or relationship that we're building, I think you can certainly inquire. We definitely don't charge. If there's a fit for you to be part of that overarching consortium, then, our business is all about facilitating and connecting and partnering folks that are relevant to that ecosystem. I think, JB, I don't know if you want to comment on some of the other consortia that were related to trauma and traumatic brain injury and how folks can get partnered up there.
Yeah, I have an example where we co-funded some work with the National Institute of Blood in NHLBI, lung blood. And they've reached out to us wanting TBI samples from patients. So we just put them in contact, for instance, to the principal investigators at the CARE Consortium. But if you want to know more about our consortium, how to get in touch with them, you're welcome to send Dr. Palestrini an email, and she can get in touch with me and my colleagues, and we can go from there.
Oh, that's excellent. There's another question about the slides being available. And I believe the recording will be available on the ABC's website. Katie, can you confirm that for me?
Yes, it will be.
Okay. It usually takes a little time, but that will be available to be reviewed. Let me see if we have any other questions. Lots of accolades for you guys. You did a great job at presenting everything. I've worked a long time with in the military mental health space, so it's just great to kind of see everything put together. I think that's all the questions that we have today, and we're coming pretty close to the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and thank the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium for co-hosting today's educational webinar with the American Brain Coalition. And I want to especially thank all of the speakers for your insightful explanations and overview of the important work that you're doing. I think the more we can find ways to collaborate together in brain health, the better we'll be for moving military mental health forward. For more information on both ABC or Mtech, please visit our websites. And thank you to everybody for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you all.